Um, Hi, how are you doing? This is Eric Hoffman. I'm speaking from Rockville, Maryland, from ReveraGen. And I think, Michaela, you were going to start off. Are you on the call?
Yes, I'm here.
Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, I just really to first of all introduce myself. I'm Dr. Michela Guvieri. I'm a consultant neurologist and clinical lecturer at Newcastle University, and I've been involved in the Vision-DMD project since the application for funding for the European Committee. And I will be the study chair of the phase 2B study with Vamolorone in DMD, which will be presented during this call. I think that I will leave Eric to then introduce himself. I just really want to introduce the reason of this webinar, which is really to present the current stage of the drug development program for Vamolorone. So what has been done so far and the results that we are happy to share at this point, and what is the plan and the timelines in order to collect more information about the effect of Vamolorone for DMD and see whether it should be considered a possible replacement therapy for corticosteroids. Some of you might be aware Vamolorone is I would always introduce as a steroid-like drug. So it's a drug that is supposed to maintain the anti-inflammatory action, which we think that is responsible of the benefit of corticosteroid in Duchenne Muscular dystrophy, but should have limited adverse events. And Eric will present details of the drug in later on. I think that the other thing that I really want to do before starting the webinar is really to thank all the founders and the patient organization who has supported the drug development program of Vamolorone so far, and without which we would not be where we are. So I think that is a unique situation here where it's been really the full project has been funded by a patient organization and government that has made all of this possible. So it's really a big thank you here. And I pass then to Eric.
Hi, thanks, Michaela. I'll just give a bit of background. Can you hear me okay? On how Vamolorone works. So basically, I'm just showing sort of a muscle cell with the outside and the nucleus. And because dystrophin's missing from Duchenne myofibers, you have membrane instability. And part of that membrane instability induces what's called innate immunity or inflammation. And this key proteins are a pathway called NF-kappa B, which is really shared with all tissue damage in any tissue, pretty much. And that goes in and the complexes respond to the fiber damage, go into the nucleus, and turn on a series of what's called pro-inflammatory proteins. Those pro-inflammatory proteins help the cell deal with the damage in normal situations. But in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, this becomes chronic, which means that because the fibers are always leaking, they're always damaged, they're always turning on NF-kappa B, and this happens from birth. So we did a study some years ago where we looked at muscle from fetal life and newborns, and then children with DMD and controls. And we could see that NF-kappa B really turn on very strongly in DMDs pretty much as soon as the child was born. But again, this is shared with many chronic inflammatory states, and it's this NF-kappa B pathway that is the target of corticosteroids like deflazacort or prednisone. So what they do is they go in, the steroid binds to a receptor, usually the glucocorticoid receptor, and it actually competes off those NF-kappa B proteins, and because of that decreases inflammation. So that's how steroids work in asthma and multiple sclerosis and so many different disorders, including probably Duchenne muscular dystrophy. They're thought to be anti-inflammatories through that mechanism. So they inhibit inflammation, lessen myofiber damage, improve symptoms, and they do work in Duchenne and many different disorders. So those are the beneficial effects of glucocorticoids like prednisone and deflazacort. But there's also adverse or safety concerns, and that comes when the drug and the receptor dimerize, so you actually create a double complex called a dimeric complex, and those go in and bind other gene elements and turn on transcription throughout the genome. But it's that seems to drive side effects. So our current models suggest that anti-inflammatory is through a monomeric or a single unit of the drug and the receptor, whereas many of the side effects seem to be driven by this dimeric or double form that drives the side effects. So the goal of the Vamolorone program was to allow single GR drug, which would be the benefit, and inhibit the double GR drug, and that would be the side effects. And so here, this is the Xray crystal structure of Vamolorone, which became the lead compound. And there's a double bond, and so what we've done is superimpose the actual molecular structure, the Xray crystallography structure of prednisone, which is the blue, with Vamolorone, which is the red. And you see they're very similar, almost superimposable through most, except this one area. And this one area seems to be responsible for this preventing dimerization, but still binding the receptor, and then dissociating the efficacy and side effects. So the goal is to retain anti-inflammatory efficacy. We've found that we've added additional new aspects of potential efficacy, where very similar to eplerenone, which is used in Duchenne to help with heart failure later in the disease, and we share that activity, whereas prednisone or deflazacort do not. We also impart membrane stability. Jody Jaiswal published a nice paper recently showing that Vamolorone is much better at helping membranes repair and remain stable than is prednisone or deflazacort. And again, we try to then reduce these drug-associated safety concerns. So we've been through the support, as Michaela mentioned, of governments and foundations. We've just finished our first in-patient trial in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I should mention that if Vamolorone were a replacement for glucocorticoids, there's many different diseases that could benefit from that, like arthritis and asthma and all sorts of disorders where prednisone or deflazacort or other glucocorticoids are used. But because of this venture philanthropy model and all the support of foundations, Duchenne muscular dystrophy is the first disease that Vamolorone is being tried on in clinical trials. So this trial that I'll describe and then pass it over to Michaela for the next trial that just started. This is the phase 2A or 002003 trial. And it starts with what's called a multiple ascending dose period, which boys go on the drug for 2 weeks daily, and then off the drug for 2 weeks. And this lets us do things like pharmacokinetics and look at acute safety. And as you see, we did a broad dose range. We started the first group of boys at about a third of prednisone dose, and then we kept on escalating till we got up to about 10 times prednisone dose. So 12 boys per dose group. And once this 4-week period was over, then they went on the same dose they were before, on drug for about 6 months or 24 weeks. And then after they finished that 6-month period where we looked at long-term safety and efficacy, benefit and safety concerns, they then, 46 of the 48 have continued into a long-term extension, which is 2 years on drug. And here in this period, patients on this long-term extension have dose escalated. So the patients in the low dose have escalated, many all the way up to the highest dose. Whereas in this period, all patients kept on the same dose. Here, they can keep on elevating the dose at the wishes of the family and the physician following them. These were all 4 to 7-year-old boys that had never taken steroids, 12 boys per group, so 48 boys total. And this is coordination of this. Paula Clemens at the University of Pittsburgh was the study chair. The Cooperative International Neuromuscular Research Group, or SYNERGY, which has done many clinical studies and trials and did a large natural history study run by Craig McDonald. That group also carried out this study. Andrea Smith was the coordinator, and the coordinating center of SYNERGY recently formed a group called TRINS. So it was SYNERGY sites. I'll acknowledge those in the end, in 4 countries, and or was it 6 countries? I have to go back and look. 48 boys, already mentioned that, and we did sample size calculations versus the natural history trial, Craig-McDonald's I mentioned, and a broad dose range. Again, 3rd prednisone dose to about 10 times prednisone dose. So the first thing we did was look at different outcomes, and we designed the trial so that there were 4 measurements of each boy for these different outcomes that you're probably familiar with within about 6 weeks' time. So while some of that 6 weeks was on drug, just 2 weeks of it, prednisone and vamorolone aren't really expected to have much of an effect in just 2 weeks. So we treated those 4 as measures as repeated measures, and when you have repeated measures in the same child, you can look at how reliable that outcome is, and you measure reliability. In other words, if the boy comes in 4 times over 6 weeks, is the time to stand pretty much the same at each visit, or does it vary from visit to visit? And so that you measure by a percentage of coefficient of variance, and the lower this number is, the more reliable the outcome is. And if it's reliable, meaning the boy shows the same value with each visit, it then becomes sensitive for a drug effect. So the more reliable an outcome, the easier it is, or more sensitive it is to see a drug effect. So what we saw is that time to walk 10 meters and 6-minute walk were quite reliable. Other outcomes were less. North Star was quite reliable as well, but others were less, like time to stand, time to climb 4 stairs, and QMT, quantitative muscle testing. We pre-specified time to stand as our primary outcome because we asked parents of DMD children which of these different outcomes they felt most relevant to their quality of life, and there seemed to be unanimous support for time to stand as most important to their day-to-day activities. But you'll notice that it is not quite as reliable. Now in the next slides I'll show you both efficacy and safety, but one thing I want to point out is the p-values, the significance of drug-induced benefit pretty much parallel these numbers. In other words, the more sensitive and reliable the outcome is, the easier and more it is to see a vamorolone effect. So here's our primary outcome, and all these slides show the low dose as a dotted line, the hatched is the next, this one is the next dose group 2, and the highest dose group is the solid line. And all these patients, there's 12 patients per group, and they're normalized to when they first entered the study, and this is after 12 weeks and 24 weeks of drug treatment. So what you see is what seems to be a dose response. So the low dose the kids get actually a little slower in time to stand. The next dose is pretty much the same, but you see an improvement of time to stand velocity, so they get faster time to stand of the 2 high dose groups. And within the study, those are significant, statistically significant. We can then add the Duchenne natural history study that was done some years ago. And here's 29 kids that were steroid naive over that same time period. And they're sort of in between, but still that's significant between the high dose vamorolone versus the natural history study. Now remember, this outcome wasn't as reliable as others. When we go to time to run walk, which was very reliable, you see even more pronounced dose response, at least at 12 weeks, low dose, next dose, next dose, next dose, highest dose. And these are statistically significant here and also very statistically significant here, including versus the natural history study. So you see the kids at the highest dose really do improve quite a bit. Now here, remember this intermediate, the second highest dose group was similar to the highest dose group. Now in this outcome, it seems to drop down. Now there's only 12 kids per dose group. So this says that, is this real or not? It's hard to say, but this dose group is not significant versus the natural history study. So the other reliable outcome was the 6-minute walk. 6-minute walk, we don't have natural history data for, at least not enough to do a comparison in the synergy. But again, you see this dose response, lowest dose, next dose, next dose, and next dose. And again, very significant improvements at the higher dose levels. Here's the North Star, which is the combined assessment. And again, the same 4 dose groups. And again, we don't have the natural history in this case. see a dose response. Now, these were not statistically significant, mostly because this is the North Star sees developmental improvement of these younger kids, even when they're untreated. So unlike the other outcomes that tended to decline at the lowest dose group in the natural history study, here they actually improved due to this total score of the North Star. So while not significant, again, it seems to imply a dose effect. We then studied a series of biomarkers. So these are blood measures. One everybody's familiar with, I'm sure, is serum creatine kinase, or serum CK. And we were actually surprised to see that those CK levels declined in the two higher dose groups. CKs are very variable, and you see that by this average change at these lower dose groups. But you see that the differences between kids in terms of their change went down, so the error bars are less, and those become significant. And they were significant after 2 weeks off drug. So this is 2 weeks on drug, 2 weeks off drug at the highest dose group. So there seemed to be some persistent effect of vamorolone on possibly membrane stability or inflammation that lowered the CKs. We also used exploratory proteins that were pre-specified, meaning they were defined in the original protocol. These were inflammatory proteins. So remember, NF-kappa B is what the target of prednisone, deflazacort, and vamorolone is. These proteins are in NF-kappa B pathways, and so they tend to go up in Duchenne muscular dystrophy and pro-inflammatory states and decreased by prednisone. So we knew these were decreased by prednisone in both Duchenne and inflammatory bowel disease. And here you see the different dose groups. And you see, comparing baseline to 2 weeks of treatment, again, a dose effect with these proteins going down as a function of dose, where the highest dose is having this anti-inflammatory effect and reducing these two proteins. And 6 of the 7 showed this dose response. This study is, I should mention, the 2-week on and 2-week off study, which is called the 002 or phase 2A, was recently published, and it's publicly accessible. So the link to that paper is here. So you can then look at safety, and obviously side effects and safety are a key aspect of the vamorolone program, and comparing those to deflazacort and prednisone. So there's different ways of looking at safety. Typically in drug development studies, clinical safety is looking at adverse events or serious adverse events. And these are anything from the drug causing liver damage or any sort of problems with just taking a drug. And particularly if you get to high levels, some of those can increase. So looking at these clinical safety concerns, in adult volunteers, we studied 86 adult volunteers, but about 40 of those were at the 2 weeks of treatment. And that was safe to the highest dose tested, which is about 20 mg per kg, or around about 20 times prednisone dose. In the phase 2A study, 2 weeks treatment, 24 weeks treatment, and again, safe to the highest dose tested. We didn't go as high into Duchenne kids, we went to 6 mg per kg. Long-term extension is ongoing. So far, there's been no dose-limiting safety concerns in adult volunteers or DMD. I should mention, I'll show you later, some kids are showing weight gain at the highest doses of vamorolone, and so the physicians and parents have decided to cut down the dose from 6 to 4 in the long-term extension. So the long-term extension allows you to go up and allows you to go down. Next, I'll turn to pharmacodynamic safety, which is drug-induced safety concerns that really are based on the drug mechanism of action, not so much on toxicity, just like hurting the liver, but more that the drug is doing something, and then that becomes a safety concern. And prednisone and deflazacort and all glucocorticoids have a series of pharmacodynamic safety concerns. So those include weight gain, adrenal suppression, a risk for adrenal crisis, loss of bone density, stunting of growth, and many others, sleep disturbances, insulin resistance. So we did a recent survey with help with foundations of parents and boys with Duchenne and adults with Duchenne, what their most concerns with safety issues of prednisone and deflazacort. This is the first 50, but I think it's about 100 now that have responded. But loss of bone density seems to be the biggest concern, and weight gain is the next. And then these three are about half of the concern. So let's look at those. And in the adult volunteers, for bone markers, we saw no changes through the highest dose. For insulin resistance, no changes through the highest dose. And adrenal suppression, we see as you increase the dose, increasing number of adult volunteers show adrenal suppression. In the phase 2A, the bone biomarkers, which is the safety concern that parents and children are most concerned with, we don't see changes yet measured by biomarkers. And so osteocalcin is a bone formation biomarker, and prednisone and deflazacort cause dramatic decreases of osteocalcin in the blood very quickly, and we don't see those. So we're hopeful that we've lost many or most of the side effects of bone with vamorolone. Insulin resistance also seems to be much less than glucocorticoids and deflazacort and prednisone. We see no increases in glucose. A measure of chronic glucose that's measured in type 2 diabetes, we don't see any increases of that. Now, we do see a bit of increase of insulin at the highest dose, but we're hopeful, since we don't see changes of glucose or HbA1c, that maybe that's not clinically significant, but long-term studies will be needed to look at that. But it's certainly less than prednisone and deflazacort. And again, we see this as the dose goes up, we see increasing adrenal suppression. Now, adrenal suppression is a complicated area, and one of the biggest concerns is risk for adrenal crisis. So many patients know that they often have a card with them when they're on prednisone or deflazacort, because if there's a trauma or surgery because of adrenal suppression, you should actually get supplemental glucocorticoids. Here's the graph of the weight gain that I mentioned at higher doses. So here you see weight gain of the 12 subjects over time. So all normalized to their baseline. And you see some gain weight, some lose weight. As you go increasing doses, here you see one patient has gained quite a bit of weight. By the time you get to the highest dose, or 10 times prednisone dose, you see a couple kids are gaining some weight. If we benchmark that against prednisone, so this is 6 months or 24 weeks of prednisone from this Synergy clinical trial that was published, of 0.75 mg per kg per day, which is your standard prednisone dose in Duchenne. You see some subjects are showing weight gain, and I've just drawn an arrow to show you the same area of the graph on these. When you look at 2 mg per kg, it seems to be just perhaps this one patient, but by the time you get to 6, there's a couple patients. So basically, both glucocorticoids and vamorolone seem to cause variable weight gain from patient to patient. Probably depends on length of treatment. And about the weight gain seen in vamorolone is about 10 times the dose of prednisone, which is 0.75. So in conclusions, we see evidence for efficacy at 24 weeks of both the 2 and 6 mg per kg. The pharmacodynamic biomarkers, the creatine kinase levels, are reduced up to 4 weeks, and we have improved safety relative to published studies of prednisone and deflazacort. So with this, the data was consistent with advancing to a blinded study, a placebo-controlled study, and that's what I'll hand it over to Michaela, and she'll talk about.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. So we'll spend the next few slides just to give really a brief overview about the phase 2b study, so the next step. The phase 2b study will be a double-blind, placebo and prednisone control group study. Myself and Dr. Paula Clemens will be the study chair for the study, and the study will be coordinated by TRINS and in collaboration with Newcastle University. The study will enroll about 120 boys with a confirmed diagnosis of DMD, with the age between 4 and 7, so they have to be younger than 7 at the time of receiving the first dose of study drug. And because of the nature of the drug, will be required that the boys have not previously been treated with corticosteroid. The study will be divided in a way in 2 periods. During the first period of 6 months, 24 weeks, boys will be randomly assigned to receive either one of the 2 selected doses of Vamolorone, so 2 milligrams or 6 milligrams per kilo of Vamolorone, placebo or prednisone. After the first 6 months, all boys will be moved into another 24 weeks treatment period, where all boys will receive Vamolorone of either the high or the low dose. This means that the one that has started on a low dose of Vamolorone will continue for a period of a year on the same dose of Vamolorone, the same for a high dose of Vamolorone, while the placebo, the prednisone group, after the first 6 months will be divided to randomly receive either the high or the low dose of Vamolorone. The study has been designed in order to follow the standard of care and the updated standard of care. The full protocol has been developed in collaboration with the DMD patient and charity organization to ensure that it would reach, obviously, the objective of the study, but also is feasible both for the site perspective and obviously for the patient and their family. So the visit will be approximately once a month and should always be run within a 1-day visit. Vamolorone, as already mentioned, is administered orally, so the boys will be asked to take the study drug in the morning at home. Next slide. This is the list of all participating sites, which actually are divided in 3 different slides, just to give you an idea about the size of the study. We are fully aware that this is a population that is difficult in a way to target, the 4 to 7-year-old, and therefore we thought it was important to guarantee a high number of participating sites in order to make recruitment as efficient and as quick as possible. We expect that participants are the ones that have been relatively recently diagnosed and has not been commenced on corticosteroid yet. So the first tranche of study are the sites based in North America and so US and Canada, and the one highlighted in blue are the sites that also took part in the phase 2A sites. So we try to maintain the involvement of the sites that have took part also in the previous Vamolorone study to ensure continuity and familiarity with the study. The next slide is tranche 2, which include United Kingdom, where we will have 5 sites, Israel, Australia with 2 sites, and Sweden. These, again, in blue are the ones that already took part in the phase 2A study and have agreed to continue their collaboration with Vision-DMD and ReveraGen. We will also have tranche 3 sites that are at 3 additional European countries, Netherlands, Czech Republic, and Belgium, each with 2 sites. This is to give you a little bit the idea of the, I would say, the bigger picture. So is the full program of the development of Vamolorone for DMD. As Eric has mentioned, we have already delivered the phase 2A and the phase 2A extension study, which has now been completed, and the phase 2A long-term study is running and is scheduled to continue for 24 months. We have started recruitment in the phase 2B study. There are a few sites active already in US, and we are working in order to activate sites in tranche 2 and tranche 3 in the upcoming weeks and months. As mentioned, these are the criteria for the phase 2B study, which will last 12 months, and we anticipate it will take approximately 12 to 18 months to complete recruitment. The phase 2B study will be used for the application to the FDA and the EMA for marketing. So the study has been designed in order to satisfy the regulatory requirement for commercial application. The plan obviously is bigger, and we are already working the development of a study to ensure let's say, a wider label for Vamolorone if the safety and efficacy profile will be confirmed, to involve young children. Obviously, if the safety profile is confirmed to be better compared to the current prescribed corticosteroid, there is the reason why to target a younger population, 2 to 4-year-olds, but also considering the older boys and young men with DMD 7 to 18, with the aim to start this wider study by the end of 2019. So here we really thought about, I think that it's important that these webinars are used to receive questions. We just probably anticipate 2 questions that has already been asked in different contexts. That's probably the most frequent one. But again, there will be then space for everybody to ask additional questions. So as there was a question about the extension to older and younger DMD patients, and as I mentioned, there is definitely the intention from ReveraGen and from the consortium to develop clinical trials to evaluate the use of Vamolorone in a wider spectrum, with the idea to start in 2019. These will be initially applicable to patients that are steroid naive, but obviously when safety and efficacy profile of Vamolorone, if safety and efficacy profile of Vamolorone will be confirmed, will be considered also for transition from standard steroid to Vamolorone. Another question that we have been often asked is regarding the selection of the doses, 2 to 6 milligrams, probably based also on the data that have been presented by Eric during the call. There is some question regarding why these doses have been selected and whether an intermediate dose should also be investigated. This has been a topic that has been largely discussed with the steering committee and the full team at ReveraGen. We really thought that I think that an important point to make is that in several studies that have been developed so far, there is always the question about whether a sufficiently high dose has been tested in order to be sure that what you are prescribing is the correct dose in terms of the maximum efficacy that you can achieve. And therefore, for our perspective, it was very important to reach the 6 milligrams and the highest dose. The idea is really to identify the dose that is efficacious and is the one that is limited the side effects. But probably you need to really touch the extreme in order to be sure about the final answer. In the long-term extension study, as a continuation of the 2A and 2A extension study, we are considering the intermediate dose for the boys who do not tolerate higher doses. So we will have information also about the intermediate doses. So at the end of the day, it's always a balance, and this is where we stand at the moment. And I think that with this would be we open to any question, both for myself or Eric.
Okay, thank you, Michaela and Eric, on giving the results and the preliminary results of the 2A and 2B study. As Michaela already said, you can now ask your questions in the chat box. Well, I'm not receiving anything yet. Let's just wait for a couple more minutes. In the meantime, if you want more information about the Vision-DMD project, you can always head over to our website, Vision-DMD. Sorry. You can always head over to our website or to our Twitter account of Vision-DMD. Michaela, what are other questions that you often hear?
I think the two that are mentioned definitely are the ones that are probably the more frequent one. There is a lot of question, and I hope that already answered regarding the whether when, in a way, boys who are currently treated with traditional corticosteroid can be considered for treatment with Vamolorone. And for that perspective, I'm always conscious that obviously as much as the phase 2A study results are definitely promising, we need to ensure that the efficacy and safety profile of Vamolorone is fully investigated before moving from a well-known and efficacious drug to Vamolorone. But there is definitely the intention to.
I have a question from Jen Doe, and her question is that Glasgow seems to be in a limbo at the moment. She said we are still awaiting R&D approval, so she's not sure how to push this along because she got 3 to 4 patients waiting. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, I can comment specifically for the UK situation because I'm based in the UK, obviously. I think that it's always frustrating, and I apologize for the length of the approval system, but I can confirm that the study has now been approved by the Ethics Committee, the Central Ethics Committee and HRA in the UK. So we are planning, and all the sites will receive prompt communication within the next week or so from the monitor to start planning a site initiation visit in November time. So we would expect to open the study in the UK at some point in November.
Thank you, Michaela. I have another question from Sally. She asks, is there a reason that there will not be a trial in Germany?
Eric, do you want me to answer, or are you answering?
Oh, sure, I can answer. We did originally have a trial in sites in Germany. We ran into a couple problems with Germany. One is that there's very, very strict regulations on radiation exposure, even just with what's called DEXA or X-rays. And we have those as outcome measures in the 2B because we want to look at spine fractures, we want to look at growth rates, and it can be very challenging to get those sort of tests through regulatory committees in Germany. It can take a very long time, and sometimes they simply refuse. So that became a problem. And also, a part of this is we run under a venture philanthropy model, as I mentioned earlier, that everything's supported by grants and from foundations and governments. And with that, we need to keep costs down. We don't have the deep pockets and lots of money of a regular pharmaceutical company. So it's all a balance of sort of cost benefit of where we can afford to carry out the study at the number of sites that can enroll the most patients too. But I should mention that in the phase 2A study, the one I described, we pay for all travel and stay of families. So if there are families in Germany that would like to participate, ReveraGen is happy to pay for the travel and stay to go to another site, for example, in Belgium or Netherlands. And that's worked quite well. In fact, we have a DMD parent, Suzanne Gaglioni, who coordinates the travel and stay for parents because her son's participated in many clinical trials, and she's very sensitive to the needs of families, and that's also seemed to work quite well.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. Jen Dunn asks another question. She says, we also have not had any protocol sent through to make up site files. Will this come once we get approval to go ahead?
Yes, I mean, as Michaela mentioned, there's specific series of steps. I mean, often, well, the key ones are regulatory approval by the country, and those are country specific, and each one has different mechanisms. Then ethics approval, and again, that's specific to each country. Then you have to contract with the sites, so you do negotiations so that you agree on a budget for all the visits. And then you have a site activation where the study team goes to each site to activate the site, make sure the tests are being done correctly. So unfortunately, as Michaela mentioned, it can be a drawn out process to activate sites. We are currently enrolling at, I think, 2 or 3 sites in the US, and we expect all these sites that Michaela showed to come online by the end of the year.
Yes, I can confirm that the monitor World-Gen will get in touch with all the document. We have just received later last week confirmation of ethical approval, and I've just sent an email to the monitor to ensure communication with the sites, because I agree with you that obviously in any clinical trial, I can't reinforce enough how long the process can take, and this can be very frustrating for the family, and especially for study like the Vamolorone study, when they are in a way waiting to start corticosteroid, in waiting, hopefully with the hope that the study will open. So it's our priority to maintain this communication, and I will ensure that an email will be sent to all sites in order to discuss on a case by case if it's appropriate to. But I think that, as you mentioned, November now seems promising, sounds promising.